Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on hidden opportunities in market volatility. I'll start by talking about some important developments that are taking place in the world markets. First of all, markets across the globe have turned highly volatile and are seen to be correcting from high levels. Most investors are fearing a second wave of COVID-19 cases. In India, apart from resurgence of COVID cases, we are also seeing farmer agitation and the recent protests against reforms announced by the Modi government. We are also having Bihar elections in the coming months. Secondly, markets are posting wild swings, and we have the US elections coming. Interesting trivia, since 1992, 7 US elections have taken place. Interestingly, Nifty has given negative returns in 5 of the 7 elections. We have to keep our fingers crossed and see what happens in November. We also have the SEBI, which is the Indian regulator, announcing changes, especially to the definition of multi-cap schemes, which will come into effect on January. The impact of these 3 events on the Indian markets is to be seen, and we have none other than Mr. A. Balasubramaniam to share his thoughts. Mr. Balasubramaniam, or Bala as he known in the industry, is the MD and CEO of Aditya Birla Sun Life AMC. He is the stalwart of the mutual fund industry with over 30 years of experience in the industry, right from the days when it just started. He has been a portfolio manager not only in the equities but also in fixed income. He oversees over 2.5 lakh crores of assets, including alternate funds, real estate, PMS, global mandates through the AMC subsidiaries in Singapore and Dubai. He was being awarded the CEO of the Year title by Asia Asset Management in 2018 and 2020. Prior to joining Aditya Birla Sun Life AMC, he had a distinguished career in Can Bank Financial Services and GIC Mutual Fund. He has done his BSc in mathematics, apart from doing advanced management courses in IIM Bangalore and Harvard University. I know Bala for the last 3 decades, and what I really admire about him is, apart from deep knowledge, not only in equities but also in fixed income, is his involvement in philanthropy. He's actively engaged in philanthropic activities, especially mother and child healthcare. He's an active member of Satya Sai Sanjeevani Center for Child Health Heart Care. He's also associated with Satya Sai University, Gulbarga, that imparts knowledge on human excellence to students for higher education. His love for Indian culture brings him to associate with Melatur Bhagavatam Mela Foundation and Fine Arts Society Chembur. And a side trivia, lockdown has helped him to improve his expertise in yoga and also reignite his passion for Vedic chanting. Most of all, it is a journey which is marked by excellence, continued knowledge, and doing things which are relevant for both personal and professional life. Thank you, Bala, for joining us on this webinar. I'm sure all our clients will benefit from your deep knowledge. First question first. We have seen the markets collapsing in March, followed with a sharp recovery, whereas the GDP numbers are not showing any linkages with equity markets. It seems everybody has forgotten COVID. Now we have already come back to pre-COVID levels. 80% of IIFL coverage stocks have already re-rated significantly. What is the reason for this divorce between GDP numbers and stock markets? Can it be just explained by global liquidity, or there's something more to what meets the eye?
Yeah. Thanks, Venkat, for these nice introductions, and also having me part of IIFL Securities webinar for your customers. I think specific to the your question, I think since the time the COVID thing came, the month of March, while the market fell initially quite sharply as a result of the complete derating because the GDP would go down as the lockdown continues. While that was true from immediate reaction point of view, I think as time progressed, regulators and policymakers, I think this time the action in which they swiftly acted, we were just doing some kind of analysis as to in 2008-2009 crisis, a similar reaction came from central bankers. They took almost about 1.5 years to actually to correct the anomalies, and kept giving more stops and support to revive the economic growth. Whereas this time around, it just took about a matter of 3 weeks for them to announce various measures, which is nothing but providing liquidity, recognizing the problem, which is actually quite deeper from the economic degrowth point of view. Therefore, they need to take sufficient measures to improve the sentiment, forgetting about the earnings of the companies. At the same time, the economy has to thrive upon, and therefore the measures that they took, just about a matter of 1 month, they completed everything. So that, I think, it became an unprecedented. Because historically also such a measures they never come from any central bankers or respective government. So it started from US, then India also did the same thing. Therefore, liquidity-driven rally is one is quite continuous. And second, of course, whatever the excess that was created just before the March COVID-related issues in the month of January, especially in oil, which is nothing but an inventory supply-demand situation, and inventory was very, very high on certain commodities. That also we saw it actually getting corrected during this last 3-4 months period. The reason actually the market continues to remain somewhat a strong wicket, which is not only, of course, supported by the high liquidity, is also when the companies initially started reacting to the COVID, most of the people felt is a 3 months loss is going to be there in the revenue. I think if one looks at it today, most of the companies now start saying 75% of their pre-COVID levels they are able to reach in terms of sales, except a few sectors in the airline industry and a few others. So that's also now positivity is coming back. Even the companies in the car sales who thought that no sales will happen till September, now suddenly they're also realizing it's not as bad as what they initially thought. Therefore, some bit of movement is coming back with respect to the sales. So I think all added together, I think we are seeing actually a more stable equity market. And I think primarily, one of the primary big reason which cannot be ruled out, which cannot be even ignored, which is nothing but the low interest rates prevailing globally, high liquidity, money is now looking for higher revenue opportunities or income opportunities, and that largely cannot come in the fixed income side. Therefore, money continue to remain focused on equities investing both in US as well as in India. So that's the way I see it. No doubt, there is a disconnect between the GDP growth and the market. I think at the same time, first time ever in my own career, I'm saying this year, 2020, people are willing to ignore, given the fact the special event, on the basis of 1 year earnings not coming in, you can't punish the whole market. Therefore, you extend it by 1 more year, and therefore 2022 earnings, you start looking at it. That's why I think the market is actually looking at the whole piece.
Interesting. But sir, if you notice the entire rally which has taken place post March, then there has been a sectoral rotation, because banks which were the previous rally leaders have not done well. Bank Nifty is down, I think, 30%. Whereas pharma and IT have done extremely well. Pharma is up 50%, IT is up some 30%. So are we seeing some kind of sector? So which are the sectors, according to you, will start doing well? So will the pharma IT pack start leading the rally? Because every time we have seen such a sharp fall, the leadership changes.
I think clearly, Venkat, if you see the pharma, just today morning I was just discussing, if you look back 1 year and then look at the 1 year return of 3 year return of pharma as a sector would have been low or would have been negative. And then the same thing happened in the case of IT, of course, continues to do well. I think the world is increasing spending towards the pharma, which is basically the health sector. And second is on IT spending contrary to general expectation, given the fact that everywhere automation and then this work from home model is working. And therefore, IT is playing a bigger role in this whole space. Therefore, these two sectors actually getting stronger post-COVID with respect to their visibility as you move forward. And these are the two sectors not impacted by COVID shutdown. And given the nature of these sectors, which again goes to prove that any business that has got a longer term sustainability from the earnings point of view, where one doesn't need to worry about the fluctuation of earnings, definitely these two sectors seems to be having some added advantage compared to other sectors. But having said that, the sector rotation is a function of valuations. and that's something which always catches up. And while the sector rotation do happen, there are certain sectors like banking and financial sectors, which generally I call it as a proxy to the economy. If the economic growth is doing well, if there is a credit growth happening, say at the rate of say 14-15%, then naturally the banks are taking money from depositors and they're able to deploy their money equally well to get their net interest income margin. Today, that is not the case. Today, for the banking sectors, while the deposit growth is coming, while it's good, interest rates are down, they need to deploy their money in the form of credit growth. So, which is, I think, is a missing piece. So, till such time we see the economic growth coming back big time, and then therefore demand for money genuinely coming from borrowers increases, then the banking and financial sectors will remain as the muted sectors. Of course, these banking and financial sectors have done extremely well for the last 10 years. But I always call it the banking financial sectors is proxy to the economy. Any economy does well, naturally the financial sectors will do very well. If the economy actually as a whole, if it remains what we call, as we are currently saying, the negative growth or muted growth, then naturally the banking financial sector also would have, the banking financial sector also would have its own challenges, purely in the absence of credit growth not happening. So that's something which is one concern. That's why we see some bit of sector rotation comes in. And again, auto sectors have seen 5-6 years of downtrend. The sector, of course, is undergoing a major change because of the electric vehicles coming in globally. Again, there is a disconnect. At the end of the day, if there is a social distancing scheme, social distancing concept, also now making people to realize, should I own a two-wheeler, should I own a car? And that's also seems to be now suddenly changing the demand pattern, which was not the case earlier. Now suddenly new demand pattern is emerging. Therefore, we see somewhat of sector rotation coming in the auto sector as well. And then lastly, cyclical sectors go through demand supply situation in the respective segment, whether it is in commodities, whether it is companies like aluminum producers or copper producers, oil producers. So they actually move on the demand supply situation, how the inventory levels are behaving. And luckily what has happened in the last 4 or 5 years, China has been cutting down their capacity. And as a result of that, the demand supply situation is actually becoming more normal. There is no excess supply, price stability is coming in. And if there is a huge investment that, say, assuming is being made by China for recovery path, then naturally the demand also improves. That is why I think valuation comes in. So as a result of this sector rotation, relative valuations comes and play a bigger role. And that's why we have seen in the last 4 or 5 months, it's getting just changed. And that you have seen in every segment that we have seen. But at the end of the day, the market doesn't reward the companies do not have earning visibility, or maybe a good governance, good balance sheet. And wherever there is high debt is there, or maybe wherever there is a probability of NPAs rising, the markets have not been rewarding them quite significantly, even if there is sector rotation. So I think the fundamentals, reason on which you buy the companies, that remains even now.
So coming to financial services, as you said, the sector has done very well. But two points I have. One is that banks are seeing so much of liquidity flows, but credit growth is muted. And second thing is about this entire split between private sector banks and public sector banks. One sector trades at 4 multiple, other trades at 0.5 times book. So do you think there will be some hope for PSU banks like SBI especially, or they are, as you said, they'll, because of lack of earnings visibility and debt and NPA, they'll continue to languish. So can you throw some more lights on your views on the banking sector?
Yeah, I think interestingly, Venkat, as a fund house, we've been actually bullish on financial sectors for long.
For long, you
and we correct. We of course we did avoid buying into PSUs for quite some time. Of course, we got caught last year when Arun Jaitley was the finance minister. He brought in the necessary capital for these banks, and that actually revived the fortune of these banks. So that is why we came and made some investments in the space. But if you look at the banking sectors, I divide them into 4 parts. One, the private sector banks, which is the new age private sector banks, old age private sector banks. Then you have a public sector banks. Then comes actually is the NBFCs sectors. So these are 4 sectors. And whichever the banks which are predominantly retail-oriented bank, they have done extremely well. Those who have focused on retail orientation is high, and they don't have any other business except taking deposits and focused on customer and focused on building a retail base. They have done well. Whether it is an NBFC, whether it is in banking, they have done well. But some of the public sector banks, they were predominantly as the wholesale lenders. I think most of the people who have been the wholesale bank lending, and given the fact India had huge amount of NPAs in the last 6-7 years, all the wholesale banks did have a huge impact on their NPAs and therefore the valuations and therefore ultimately in the price. State Bank of India is one case in point. They have created huge good subsidiary companies, successful subsidiary companies, but they are not able to create value for the main company, but they are able to create value for subsidiary companies. That is coming from the fact that one, the NPAs, to what extent they have to make provisions, and second, to what extent the efficiency parameter on which we can actually improve the valuations, which is generally is not visible in public sector banks, whereas that is more visible in the private sector bank. And then within private sector banks, those who have got a lot of clarity with respect to the retail based lending growth are the ones who have done very well. So, but having said that, ultimately valuation has to catch up. I think deep value remains a deep value for sometimes. But as you rightly put it, when the sector rotation happens, as the market reaching certain level, but you can't keep giving a higher valuation for certain companies, which could, I think, make those companies suffer in the long run because of high valuation if the growth doesn't come back. So therefore, I think the valuation somewhere it has to catch up. But the question which has been there for public sector banks is, or maybe public sector companies, deep value companies, great businesses, reasonably good leadership in the respective banks. But having seen some bit of uncertainty on supply of paper, and sometimes you have a divestment which comes in, sometimes they need to raise capital at lower book value price. So also I think when it happens, then naturally some of these companies don't do well in the as we have seen currently. The same way NBFCs, if you see, NBFC is a great model to run, but at the same time, the non-bank financial services, those who are predominantly in the retail, they have done excellently well from the point of view of business. I'm not talking about stock price, I'm talking about business point of view. And those who have the wherewithal during the whole period of the last 1.5 years since the ILF has happened, and those who have reasonably good SMEs and in the retail book, they have not only managed to survive, they also brought on the interest costs. IIFL is one case in point. I think weathered the whole thing quite nicely because the business model was such that it had a good mix of SMEs and retail loan book in the form of an gold loan, etc. Therefore, they could survive. They could actually pull back even during this crisis time quite successfully. So that's the way the financial service does. But under the day, since they are directly linked to the macro, directly linked to the economic growth, and given the fact that current economic growth is low, NBFC sector, the financial service sectors continues to remain volatile. It does not left any, even the good banks, you may call it as HDFC Bank is one of the greatest bank. If they themselves have corrected, like Bajaj is great NBFCs, retail-oriented NBFCs, even they corrected by 33% because of the economic growth being somewhat slower.
So effectively, you're saying is that the banking sector will come back into fashion once there's clarity on the economic credit growth, economic and credit growth.
Exactly.
So coming to valuation, there's another sector I want to ask you, the FMCG sector and MNCs. You have a fund also, an MNC fund, so which has done very well. So,
correct.
So what is your view on FMCG? Because all of them trading 100 multiple, 100 very high multiples, not 100, definitely high multiples. So and so what's your view? There'll be some earnings catch up, or
I think interestingly,
underperform?
Yeah, interestingly, Venkat, I'm just giving this as an insight. It's not my own insight. So I had a chat with one of my own old friend. Used to be one of the market big players. Used to only trade in the market quite extensively, and I can call him as a mover of the market. So we used to once I met him recently, and we had a discussion. So I asked the gentleman, how is your investment going? Are you the same style of old style you are operating, or you have changed your investment style? He said, Nabala, that is my old avatar. Now I completely changed. Now I became a big investor in the market. Now I buy only multinational companies like Nestle types. So I own 1%, 2%. All he was mentioning. The reason I mentioned it, I of course like that. He said, Bala, whenever I buy these companies, I get into confusion. They are trading at 80 times PE multiple, 100 times PE multiples. But one thing I've seen in the companies, PE multiple, earnings remain the same, earnings keeps rising, and PE multiple drops, and then EPS gets better. Then another 3 years of bull run, I'm saying. And these companies do not have debt, and the free cash flow generation company, the reward shareholders, sometimes hefty dividends, sometimes they come and do a buyback of shares. And also the earnings keeps on coming in because of sustainable, they're all in the operating sustainable business model. And therefore, I now decided not to look at the PE multiple and then buy this company and sit on it forever. So that is why I created my core portfolio I was mentioning. So I'm saying that is a reality. The advantage on FMCG companies, though we have seen many FMCG companies, valuation wise, most of us like money managers do ignore and do say that why would I buy a company that's trading at 100 times PE multiples? Yeah, 100 times PE multiples for say 3 years and no change in the stock price, but the earnings catch up. Again, with the PE multiple comes down, then the price goes up, again go through a flat period, again same thing happens. I have seen this happening in companies like P&G. I have seen it happening in companies like Pfizer.
Nestle 5 years did not go anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000. And then when it went up to 16,000.
It went up, is correct. So I've seen this Nestle, I've seen this Lever. There was a period Hindustan Lever at 180 rupees. People were in a queue to give it under the buyback of shares. When they were to do a creeping acquisition at a 220 rupees price, when the price is 185, most of the people would have given the stocks at 220 rupees price. Today the stock is 1,000 rupees. Especially in the multinational companies, FMCG companies, while the valuation argument will remain always, no doubt. But I think once you understand the business model, the way the companies function in every cycle, and because the business does not have the cyclical nature, the cyclical nature it has got only in the form of high PE multiples. The high PE multiples, a continuous earning growth coming in, good balance sheet, should not make too much of concern for investors. These are buy and hold kind of things. For example, our MNC fund, you took an example. We have many companies. We have many companies, and this fund actually took over from Apple in the year 19.
I know that it's been for a long time.
Has been there for a long time, and the portfolios have done very well. We have least churn, and the stocks that we have in this portfolio, all our multinational companies, there are occasions do not perform. There are occasions give a significant outperformance. I think Nestle is the example. What it took is the right example. So there are many companies like that. Therefore, this will remain as a part of debate. I think the way I see is this should be part of the core portfolio, at least which can come in handy during the tough time to give you a protection on the downside.
One of our viewers is asking a question which I'll ask. I know that you're not a medical expert, but given the fact that you have reading of the markets and macroeconomic, what is the sense you're getting? Is COVID under control, or it's like another second wave, third wave, or whatever?
Yeah, I think these one or two assumptions which is coming is, I think as it was predicted, I think the John Hopkins had made a predictions some months back that countries like India, will have about 10 crores populations will have COVID infected. I mean, these are some of the predictions which just came that time. So no doubt that time everybody ignored it, saying it can't go to that level. And given the nature of the whole COVID as a pandemic, definitely it has got the more power to spread. That's I think which is coming. But one of the things which definitely is being seen is while the number of cases are rising, I think death ratios are coming. The more the test you do, the more the people will find it infected. But I think death rates also is coming down. So which is I think which is seen generally is seen as a good sign, and therefore I will probably see the second wave or third wave as you are saying, as and when I think economic is opened up and people start ignoring COVID, you'll probably see more people getting infected. But probably we will not see the kind of fear and the damage which was there between April and May or June. Probably that will gradually die down. Of course, the general estimate is a lot of people have been predicting that as the vaccine comes, you'll probably see more progress coming in. But there are also segment of the people who have been saying that vaccine probably will not come, but the COVID also will go away the way it came. So let us hope for the second one.
Let's hope for that. Exactly. Sir, the other question which we had is about this recent guideline by SEBI on this entire multi-cap definition of and forcing fund managers to have 25, 25, 25 in multi-cap funds. Given the fact that if you look at all of you benchmark a multi-cap fund against the BSE 200 or BSE 500, so there itself small cap weightage is doubt whether it will be about 25, 25, 25. So how will you, so how does, and you have been a representative of the mutual fund industry body also. So what is the discussions going on? And because most people, because the discussion of the fund manager is taken away if this kind of guidelines come.
Yeah. So in fact, Venkat, the whole categorization of mutual fund schemes, one of the member, part of the committee was mine. In the year 2017, 2018, we did this whole exercise. We kept multi-cap fund as a flexi-cap category only because it can invest anywhere it wants. Maybe the SEBI would have had many representation, maybe they would have had their own observations. And therefore, they said that when every other schemes have got some bit of parameter in which they have to operate. And a multi-cap fund also, the offer document, if one looks at it, it always says that we'll invest in across market cap. That's what it says. Therefore, SEBI has come with some kind of basic question mark saying that when you have discipline other schemes, why don't you have the similar discipline on the multi-cap fund? Because multi-cap means I'm supposed to invest in large cap, mid cap, and small cap.
Mid cap, yes.
So therefore, they are now defined. Now, having defined the limit, when the regulator issue such kind of new regulatory regime, then naturally for them they cannot take it back. At the same time, they also listen to the industry players, and they in my view, there is a category for flexi cap where you leave the money manager to decide wherever they want to invest.
Correct.
Maybe there is a space for introducing one more category, the form of flexi cap. And AMFI as a body in which we are all part of that, have made a representation to SEBI, and hopefully they come with some kind of guideline on this thing very soon. But that doesn't mean that whatever they have given probably will be taken away, given the fact that they were also thought through before coming with this kind of guideline. That's something which in my view, probably they will overcome that, what they have done by introducing one more category. That's one possibility is there. But having said that, yes. No, multi-cap thing will remain probably 25, 25, 25, may remain as it is. They may give one more category like flexi-cap fund. Suppose they give a flexi-cap fund, the existing multi-cap funds, either they can position themselves as a flexi-cap fund, or they go with the new, the 25, 25 they have been defined. So in my view, it become neutral. It become neutral to less negative. Having said that, I think the market also, SEBI has got both the role to play. One as a regulator, they have to regulate all of us. As a money manager, they need to tell us where we are going wrong, what we are doing is not right. So that's basically nothing but coming with the frequent observation on what we are doing and make a course correction in control money manager behavior and mutual fund behavior. That's another way we all deal with public money. Therefore, we have to be extremely careful. So that's something SEBI has been doing a great job. But at the same time, there are certain action of this kind when they take, it also helps in broadening the market. I think sometimes what happens is like a FANG stocks in the US, 50% of the Dow Jones return has come from 7 stocks. They call it the awesome stocks, or maybe they call it the FANG stocks. So whereas in India also, if you look at it,
Reliance.
Yeah, that's right. It's about 3-4 companies that are given the maximum return, and the rest of the markets are not done well. Therefore, in any market, you cannot have so many number of companies not doing well. Only few are doing well when economy is such a large economy like India. So therefore, what SEBI has done through this process of defining 25, 25, 25, now the money managers will be, of course, also be now start looking at opportunities in the small companies, mid-sized companies, and bigger companies. Therefore, they help in broadening the market. It helps in broadening the market, and more small companies may also get their attention, deserve attention from money managers. Therefore, they can become ownership and so on and so forth. So it has its own positive. Definitely, all of us were a bit surprised when suddenly the regulation came, because we were not prepared for such regulatory change. Therefore, it came as a negative surprise initially, but now is being what do you call is being managed with the proper representation from AMFI.
The other question somebody is asking is related to this entire external events. So we have maybe 3 external events. You have shared your views on COVID. The other is China-India border, and third is presidential elections in US. So what do you think will be the impact of these 3 external events on the entire capital markets? Will that lead to the liquidity which you talked about in the beginning, or there'll be more to
Yeah,
think
I
at
think
big stage.
interestingly, Venkat, so there's not much impact as far as the liquidity concern. But the liquidity is provided by the central bankers, and the central bankers recently have gone on record in US that I'll not get worried by the inflation that is on the rise. I'll give a time for the next 2 years for inflation to settle down, and to probably start looking at 2 year average rather than at just 1 month average. So that means the federal governor, including Reserve Bank of India in India, they're extremely clear, irrespective of whatever the government is there. I think they will continue to focus on monetary policy initiatives in providing liquidity. Now, liquidity is not going to dry. What could change if the US election turns out to be a little weak? Then it can change the currency. See, sometimes we always think actually where from the risk could come. The risk could come from currency. And if US, which has been receiving money all these years from the rest of the world, probably you'll see a sell-off coming from, say, China suddenly may say that I'll reduce my exposure to US and I'll sell my bond holding that I have. The moment it does that, it has an impact on bond, it has an impact on currency, and that currency actually make the rest of the currency in the emerging market to appreciate, and the US currency will depreciate. So this way, therefore, the risk could come from currency. But would it be bad for India? Doesn't look like. And given the fact that Indian currency have been holding firm at about 74, 75 level
For a long time.
And for a long time, and Reserve Bank of India has been extremely smart in buying dollar, providing cash liquidity in the system. Probably if there's a reverse flow comes in post US election, if people start looking at investing in US, maybe a little bit risky, therefore I need to diversify my investments in the emerging market. Therefore, that can actually reverse the flows in the emerging market, which includes India. So these are some of the things I think would potentially come. Definitely, I think November 3rd election in US is keenly watched out in event from the market point of view, because of the countries are linked, capital allocation are linked from various industries. There will be few industries that may get impacted as a result of the change of guard in US. So all such things we need to watch out. Therefore, the market in the near term may remain volatile, looking for these kind of events. Then actually domestic events, we don't have too many. Even Bihar election, what you talked about, may not have much impact from the market point of view. Monsoon has been very good, and therefore agriculture-led growth also should gradually come back. I think worldwide we'll look at only the US election as one of the things to look at.
Coming to interest rates, you have been a keen observer of Indian fixed income market also. So you said that Indian interest rates will remain benign globally, but in India inflation numbers are not looking all that great. And so you think there's a chance that at least people's expectation rates will fall further, might not happen, but we'll see this kind of flattish rates for some time.
Yeah, I think interest rates in India it's actually got two problems to handle. One, of course, RBI has been extremely successful in bringing the interest rates, absolutely no doubt on that. And today we are talking about 10-year bond yields close to about 6%, and bank deposit rates for 1 year has dropped about 4.5%, 4.5% roughly, and overnight rates are about 3.5%, 4%. I think this is mainly has come from only liquidity. I think inflation, of course, is seen as a temporary rise. At the same time, in India, inflation can always play a murkier game. And fortunately, the recent APMC Act removal, abolition of the introduction of new agriculture bill, and definitely bringing in farm to the market in terms of supply of farming goods, so that the price comes down, intermediary cost goes up, it gets reduced. Therefore, end price comes down. At the same time, farmers get a better revenue. That model, in my way, will keep the vegetable prices under control. But having said that, one of the area concern could be there for India. Unlike in US, there's got a huge appetite for printing notes and manage the fiscal. And India is somebody who's not in that wicket. I think the fiscal balance, which is basically the government of India's tax collection remains weak, state government tax collection remains weak. The lockdown continues to remain the way I think it is for the same 1 or 2 months. Definitely will have an impact on government revenue, which comes in the form of tax, as well as comes in the form of public sector divestment. And these two not being there, fiscal will go up. If there's a fiscal, then government of India has to borrow more. So we'll have to just keenly await and watch that how they are going to manage the increased borrowing needs of the government. either through market borrowing or through Reserve Bank of India borrowing using the Reserve Bank of India balance sheet. If they choose the second option, then naturally the bond market will remain somewhat stable. If they choose the first option, they come to the market again for borrowing. It could definitely have some bit of impact on the bond market. But having said that, probably with Chavez scenario, government bond yields would be under tight, whereas the corporate borrowing, given the fact no corporates are wanting to borrow big time, therefore that market I think will remain somewhat under control. Yeah.
Sir, given the fact that rates are so low, what's your advice to fixed income investors? Because if you talk to any fixed income investor, everybody is unhappy.
No, fixed income investors, while of course they became unhappy because the exposure that they all had taken to the credit funds, and also the after 2018 crisis, people started analyzing the portfolios more closely, saying there is a mark-to-market valuations and impact, and there was a credit losses and all.
Correct.
In my view, in a mutual fund fixed income space, while this kind of worry would come, there are two worries will come on mutual fund space. One is credit loss. Second is the mark-to-market loss.
Loss of
because
rate.
the interest is moving up and down, both in the govies market and then corporate bond market. But these two, despite they being there, but fixed income in the long run does very well if you take a 3-year or 5-year view. They really do much better than equity market volatility. Only because of the interest accrual in the portfolio is very, very large. Therefore, fixed income investors, somebody has got a longer term investment. One should not get too much worried about fixed income portfolios in mutual funds. Given the fact that whatever risk we all would have gone through in the recent past, that's only a temporary, momentary, it happened at that point of time. So therefore, if you choose fixed income schemes, I think you would probably better off in terms of longer term experience. Another thing which I think, Venkat, which I always tell a lot of people, when I go and invest in a SBI 1-year deposits, SBI deposit I keep, as a depositor, I always look at for 1 year. I say that I'll take investment for 1 year and 3 years. I don't invest beyond that. Whereas when it comes to the mutual fund, you don't need to, you come for a scheme, say low duration fund for a 1-year time frame, you don't need to redeem it. Because the interest rate assuming scenario goes up at the end of 2022, I'll also start investing in the same paper, same money at a higher rate of interest. Suppose the interest rate comes down, I know the same money that you have money with me at a lower rate of interest. Because I go through the cycle all the time. I invest in a higher yield, I invest in lower yield, it goes like this in a cycle. If I give a longer time frame, the experience in mutual funds is far better than the experience that you may get in any other fixed income investments.
No, but what would be your expectation? Suppose suppose we meet a customer, we have to tell the customer. So if you are investing for 3 years or 4 years, so what kind of returns you can expect? Assuming that
See, the general expectation that one should always hold as well as the mutual fund as a thumb rule, I am saying. Just a simple thumb rule, though we don't guarantee.
No.
The simple thumb rule is the repo rate is about 4%, and repo rate plus about 2%, which is about 6%. I think one can expect in mutual fund on a 3-year basis. Suppose the repo rate is a 5%, then 5 plus 2, probably you can expect about 7. See, it can be 2 to 3, 2 to 3%. So see, why I am saying this 2% of IRFM I am deriving it. Today the repo rate is 3.35. 10-year bond is about 6.1 or 6%. 5-year government bond will be about 5.75. So roughly about 2.5%. So I think that's a benchmark if one keeps it on their expectations, and which is quite feasible given the fact that the moment interest rate goes up, whatever the maturity that we have will invest in a higher rate of interest. That cycle actually will take care of the return expectation.
If I invest in fixed income, I should expect, say, repo plus 200 basis points. But that is dependent upon the kind of fund I invest, or this, because people with credit funds didn't have such a good experience.
Yeah, the way I think mutual fund has got portfolios ranging from liquid fund, which is meant for overnight investing or 90 days investment. Then we have ultra short-term funds, low duration fund, ultra short-term funds. Then you have corporate bond fund, PSU funds. Any mutual fund schemes which invest in about 1 to 2.5 years kind of duration, and what I'm saying would come true.
Okay.
Whereas in a scheme, say in income schemes where Birla Income Plus, I'm calling it as a Birla Income Plus, our own fund, is a 7-year duration. In a 7-year duration, suppose you make an investment, then naturally the interest rate goes up, your portfolio will have a negative value, no doubt. So therefore, the longer the duration, one should also assume there is an element of risk. What I am saying is that repo plus 2% would come in the 2 to 3 years kind of duration bucket portfolio, come from low duration, short duration, corporate bond fund, and kind of things. See, credit risk fund is like you are investing in a small and mid cap types. So higher the risk, higher the return. So credit risk fund comes in that category. So one should not make the mistake of putting all their money in credit risk fund and suddenly realize I made a mistake in choosing this fund, therefore mutual fund is bad.
Fair enough. So given the fact that Government of India doesn't seem to have so much of leeway because fiscal deficit they don't want to let go, economy is bad, so the tax collections are low, no divestment is taking place. So where will they get the money to stimulate the economy? Or they don't care and they say every man to himself?
See, Venkat, at this point of time, yes, it is $1 million question. And not just only in India, even globally, every economy goes through a same situation. But having said that, definitely, I think times like today, the government of India does not have much choice but to borrow from the market, allow the fiscal to go up, and they don't have choice. They allow to let go, and it's not going to just happen only in India. Even globally, is going to happen. And second is Reserve Bank of India, as they have done, they have to print money if there is a need. Again, it's a special situation, and something is completely unprecedented. Therefore, they have to do that. Naturally, of course, it will have some impact on the tax collection growth. At this point of time, even they don't have much leeway to increase their taxes, and therefore they can actually look for tax collection growth as well. I think these times we don't have much choice but to live with drop in the fiscal deficit, increase in fiscal deficit, and even if we know very well the government do not have much leeway to manage the whole show. That's something I think 2021 we'll have to live with that. I think as we make a progress, as we move forward, the government of India is already thinking about privatizing some of these government companies so that they can get a huge pool of money. So one divestment of BPCL, if they're able to do it at a good price, and then they show to the world that yes, government of India's jewels can also be sold at a very good price at a premium to the current market price. Suppose they're able to establish that track record by way of divestment, strategic sale, then it can set the new path for the government.
Interesting. Another question I have is that many of the customers, and there are lots of articles saying that Nifty returns has not been good for the last 6 years, SIP returns are not so good. So what will advice be for people who are disappointed with meager returns?
Yeah.
It will be a catch-up happening, or it's...
No, I think the way I see is, I take this example, Venkat. I think 2008, when Lehman Brothers crisis happened, market collapsed. 9 market was good, but 10, 11, and 12 markets were very bad. 3 years, it tested everyone. And even some of us will be part of the financial market. Even we all started wondering, actually, is the market to be in, given the fact that the whole economy has gone for a toss post Lehman Brothers crisis. And 2 years, a good change. I think 2014, 15, post Prime Minister Modi coming to the power, we saw a huge run in the market. So whatever you could not earn in the last 3 years period before that, I think we could catch up in the same way for next 2 year period. I think stock market, I always believe that 3 years of bear market or no return market, it gives you 2 years of good market. But at the end of the day, I have seen whenever the market has given a huge negative return, the subsequent period market gives a positive return, or maybe marginally positive and then big positive. The same way, whenever the market has given a single year 60-70% return, the subsequent years market has given a lower return, which is again coming from the simple fact that the longer term average return on equity should be estimated to be somewhere around nominal GDP plus 2%. So in this case, nominal GDP is about say 9 to 10%. That means 2% if you add up to that, 2 to 4, one should expect 12 to 14% kind of return. Only if I give a long rope. I think in the last 3 months or last 3 years or 5 years, on the basis of it, you cannot judge your investment performance. And given the fact that one good market can completely change the return that has been generated in the last 3 years or 5 years.
So your message is that if you don't worry if your portfolio is not done good for 3-4 years, hold on. It might be darkest before dawn. So just when it's a recovery phase, don't let go.
Correct. I think if people just suddenly start thinking that my returns are low, therefore let me move out. I think one simple question I have to ask, okay, I'm moving up to one asset class. and where I am moving, if would that asset class where I am moving will it give me a better return? If the answer is yes, then one can go for it. If there is no answer to that, then you rather live with the existing portfolios.
Actually, that's a good point you're making, because there's no answer to it.
Correct.
In this situation, it's very difficult to identify an asset which will give you better returns.
Correct.
Because
another thing is, Venkat, I've also seen that whenever people rush for buying certain things, I'll give you a simple example. Just about 3 weeks back, when the Reserve Bank of India was closing the window for gold bond, there was a rush to buy that particular day, thinking that today is the last day, we have to take it. And since then, gold price is down by 10%.
Correct.
The same bond is trading in the secondary market at 7-8% discount. Therefore, we don't need to rush for anything on either side, either on the bull side or on the bear side. Right now, there is a feeling of not generating return. Also, it should not make you reverse the decision that you already taken. Even the fact one good market will give you a reversal of the whole stuff.
But actually now, for the last 3-4 years, everybody is waiting for that one good market, because as you pointed out in the beginning, that most of the returns are coming from Reliance. And in at least the retail customers whom we handle, none of them is holding Reliance. Okay, sorry, that's a wrong word. A few of them are holding Reliance. So there's a feeling of, I would say, left out or whatever you call. So because small cap, mid cap has not done anything. So what's your view? Because is it time to invest in small cap, mid cap? How will you construct a portfolio at this point? What would your advice to a retail investor be?
Yeah, no, the way we look at which is what I've been saying at various forums. See, when you have to look at the portfolio constructions, I need to have a good mix of large cap, multi cap, and mid cap. Well, of course, large cap, this basically takes care of my asset allocation. And second is, if somebody has got a longer time frame, which is more than 5-year kind of time frame, they should have equally good allocation towards smaller mid cap. And given the fact that small size companies who are small and mid size companies who are in a great business, a good management, they have the wherewithal to actually build the business for the future, and therefore they become actually bigger and bigger as we move forward. And we need to keep that in mind at all point of time. Second is the mid-sized companies, given the fact their earnings power is relatively higher when things turn around in the economic growth. They probably, if the large company is able to grow, it's about 11%. The mid-sized companies can grow easily at about 2 times of that in a good period. So that is the time I think value gets unlocked in the small and mid-cap companies. Where we all make mistakes and when buy in a small and mid-cap companies who does not have much vision, and in terms of management depth, if they don't have, those are the companies most of the time it fails. As long as one is able to avoid that, either in a direct investing or in the through the mutual fund portfolios, even as money managers, then I think small and mid cap, it definitely deserves to be part of the portfolio, as long as the time horizon that we give is more than 5 years types.
So and how much of debt should I have? Typically, that 100 minus age rule should still applies, or rules have changed as of now?
No, definitely that still applies. I always say that start the portfolio with 50-50, 50 in equity and 50 in debt. Don't take any view, fixed income should I now allocate because it gives me 6%. Then depending upon these things, you keep moving up, 50 goes to say 60, 65. And then debt comes actually lower. I think this is the model. I think if one is able to keep it as part of the asset allocation, I think half the race is one. And only when I go skew towards any single segment of the market, whether it is fixed income or equity, of course, fixed income, there is absolutely no loss. But let us not get scared by what happened in 2018, 2019 on fixed income market.
Actually, sorry, so because most of the investors have been not so happy with the Templeton episode. So if you, so will you just, given the fact that you're an industry veteran, so this is a one-off event. So you should, what's your message to investors be?
See, Templeton is something, it's again, unfortunate it had to happen. And they have to close down they have to stop the redemptions for various reasons. When they did this in the month of January, February, when they did this, when they did in the month of March, things were bad. April, things were bad. In the sense that at that time, nothing was known. Markets are not having a liquidity. Market had a liquidity. The market was punishing all the companies which are less than AAA securities. People like us, we could foresee some of those aspects. We could manage the portfolio. And whereas in the case of Templeton, you had large component exposure into the A and A plus kind of names. Therefore, you couldn't find liquidity. Today, if you ask me, all these companies will be able to find liquidity on some of these papers. Leave aside some of where they would have probably lost money. I mean, losing money is anyway, it's a function of the call that they would have taken. Leave aside that, the rest of the portfolio anyway are liquidatable. Unfortunately, in the case of Templeton, because it has gone to the matter of court, and now they have to follow whatever the ruling that come from court. So I think the current delay from Templeton, I would assume it is because of sub judice, it has gone to the court, therefore it's getting delayed. But if you ask the underlying portfolio, though your money is tracked, no doubt, but if you ask me, every day he runs NAV. He runs NAV every day, he applies the valuations, and as the other mutual funds are running their NAV, they're also running it, except you're not able to redeem the money. But as the clearance that comes either from SEBI or from the court, then naturally whatever the liquidity they have created in the portfolio, if money is yours, money only. See, unlike a bank, unlike an say a collective investment firm, or maybe unlike a Nidhi kind of model where the money is getting lost. In the case of Templeton, money is lost. Money is there, except it's not available for you to withdraw, and that is the only issue which is there. Therefore, if somebody got stuck in Templeton, no doubt you want the money, you are not able to get it. That's the only pain point. But as the money is gone, money is not gone, except the mark-to-market valuation, you would have lost some money in the credit losses. But in my view, that is anyway a function of his credit portfolio. But otherwise, in my view, once the sub judice it gets removed, you would get the money on the basis of the NAV that is being given.
And what about your view on thematic funds, sectoral funds? Is it time for us to push pharma and IT funds?
See, as part of asset allocation, Venkat, is fine. I think as pharma and IT fund, as part of asset allocation, it makes sense. If somebody has got a 2 to 3 years kind of time frame, or even more than that, given the fact that I mentioned earlier that but the health sector is going to remain a big area of focus in IT. Therefore, the two as a sectoral fund, it makes sense to be part of the portfolio.
And if you have holding period of more than 5 years, then small cap and mid cap should be there.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And one last question is that what is your view on the rise of the passive funds? Because in India also we are seeing a very slow hidden fact, but ETF flows are rising in India.
Correct. No, interestingly, that's a challenge for us as an active money managers, because we all try to make return by beating the benchmark alpha. Frankly, generating alpha in the last 2-3 years, 2 years especially, has not been that easy. Given, as you rightly mentioned, one stocks like Reliance goes up, but as a money manager, we have a constraints of not more than owning 10% a single company.
No, you can buy Reliance, but then when it turns, everybody will write articles about you saying.
So that's something is a constraint. Even globally also, most of the money managers do not own FANG stocks. Even the best of the money managers globally, they don't own Apple, they don't own Google, and that's the way it works. But at the same time, ETF as an asset class gives you, you don't take the risk of money managers. You don't need to care about whether it is Birla or HDFC or anybody for that matter, or Prudential. You can invest as you like it. Therefore, ETF as an asset class is a growing asset class, is agnostic to the money manager, agnostic to the market, and definitely it gives you lower expenses. But I think market like India, where the alpha generating capability of money manager in the long run over buying small and mid cap companies still remain very large. Therefore, the money manager's ability to outperform the index in the long run is still high. Therefore, we can't measure the success of money manager in the last base of 2 months or last 2 years of underperformance of the index. But I think when the market depth increases, you will find the small and mid cap also doing well. Therefore, in order to have exposure to ETF, again, I believe in complementing it. They both complement each other. It's not that either or. It's basically the diversified equity funds, actively managed funds, and passive funds should be part of the portfolio of the customer. Then only you'll get the right diversification. You don't chase one side, okay, ETF is doing well, suddenly you realize money managers are doing much better. Instead of trying to jump from one to other, I think having both the schemes as part of the portfolio as a complement to each other is actually the best option that one can choose.
Thank you so much for your time. The conversation was very interesting. If I can conclude, I think the best message for the investor is that 3 years have been not so good, but don't lose hope now. The coming 2 years will be much better than the 3 years. And if you are holding a small cap, mid cap, have an investing period of 5 years. And for fixed income, if you hold for 3 years, then you should get repo plus 200 basis points, and there's no need to panic. Thank you so much, Bala, for your time. It's really very interesting talking to you. And on behalf of IIFL Securities and all our participants, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts in a very candid manner. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Venkat, and thanks for having me part of your session. And thanks to all the investors who have been part of the listening side. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.